Hurricane Harvey barrels towards Texas tonight, there's a trifecta of new reports on the probe into possible Trump collusion between the Trump administration and its campaign and Russia. NBC News reports special counsel Robert Mueller issued grand jury subpoenas in recent days to public relations executives who worked with Paul Manafort. It's the first public indication that the investigation is beginning to compel witness testimony before the grand jury. Also this afternoon, the Wall Street Journal reported that Mueller is, quote, examining what role, if any, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn may have played in a private effort to obtain Hillary Clinton's emails from Russian hackers. Well, that effort to work with hackers was led by a longtime Republican activist who described Flynn as an ally, according to the Journal. And then there was this Washington Post report today about concern within the CIA. According to the Post, CIA Director Mike Pompeo has taken a special interest in an agency unit that is closely tied to the investigation into possible collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, requiring the Counterintelligence Center, or Mission Center, to report directly to him. Officials at the center have in turn kept a watchful eye on Pompeo himself, who has repeatedly played down Russia's interference in the 2016 election and demonstrated a willingness to engage in political skirmishes on behalf of President Trump. Well, the Post reports that while Pompeo hasn't interfered with the unit's work, there is concern about what he will do if the CIA uncovers new, potentially damaging information about the president. Well, one U.S. official told the Post, people have to watch him. It's almost as if he can't resist the impulse to be political. For more on all this, I'm joined by NBC News national security reporter Ken Dilanian, U.S. Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. MSNBC national security analyst Malcolm Nance, and the Wall Street Journal's Eli Stokols. In that order, what do we make of the fact that Counsel Mueller and his people now are apparently issuing subpoenas, but they're basically going after, let's start with this, Manafort, who always looked like the low-hanging fruit here, Ken. It doesn't surprise me that they're moving faster on him because of all his, let's put it this way, commercial entanglements with all elements of the Russian hierarchy.
It doesn't surprise me either, Chris. And what this is at bottom is an effort to get behind why Paul Manafort was paid $17 million by a Russian-backed Ukrainian political party. And this was a lobbying campaign that went on between 2012 and 2014. A group of Washington PR firms were paid millions of dollars to lobby the U.S. government on behalf of this Ukrainian regime. And they didn't register as foreign lobbyists at the time. They've subsequently done so. Manafort has subsequently done so. Now Mueller wants to know, who got paid, what did they do, what was Manafort's role. But he's not just asking, he's compelling their testimony before a grand jury. And as you know, when you go before a grand jury, you can't lie. If you lie, you go to jail.
Congressman, what do you have on this in the committee? What do you know Manafort's role here? What is it? What are they looking at him for?
We know that he was a central figure at one of the most intense periods of Russia's interference. So, Chris, he presided as the chairman when the convention took place. He was a part of the team that allowed Carter Page to travel over to Moscow. He was in that June 9 meeting, and he had prior ties personally, financially, and politically to Russia. So this shows that progress is being made. But, Chris, it also shows that these investigations take a very, very long time, especially when you're dealing with such complex financial transactions and communications.
Eli, what do you got on him? Because I say low-hanging fruit because from the beginning of this sort of inquest, which began months ago, we've wondered about first of all, why did Trump pick Manafort, a man whose all his relationships seemed to be Russian? What was that bent about? What did he expect to get from a guy who had all these entangling relationships, except he wanted them? Well, he wanted a guy around who had all this going on in Russia.
I think at the time, our reporting is that during the campaign was kind of in a fraught place. A friend of President Trump, told him, hey, I got a guy, I know somebody, he'll be good at this, he'll help stabilize the campaign, and brought him in. It's unclear whether or not the president was actually aware of all of Paul Manafort's foreign entanglements, but it's pretty clear at this point that he is a top target of this probe. And you've seen the president, over several months as this has gone on, distance himself from a lot of people, including Paul Manafort. They never had a close personal relationship, and he has said many times, oh, he was a guy who worked for me, he wasn't there that long.
Malcolm, give me your full sense of your instinct on this, your way of, I have sort of an instinct too, but it's not as professional as yours, about Manafort. He just seems like the kind of guy who would be involved in a lot of intrigue, not everything you want to put out on the table, a bit like that, but that's just my hunch. You know more.
Well, he has a history at this, and he worked for the the dictators lobby. But I think what Mueller and his team are doing is very, very smart. They are throwing a circle around Manafort's financial past. And they're going to either determine one of two things. Either he was working with the Kremlin as a Kremlin asset, or he was just a really poor choice businessman who had a poor choice of clients. But by issuing these subpoenas, they are going to squeeze everyone that's ever worked for him. And they're going to determine whether there's documents, statements, or processes that are missing there to make him talk.
Well, you know how everybody in Russia always has an American? I've heard about this for years. They've got an American they work through. Can you imagine Putin when he hears that Trump, one of the candidates for president, and not Hillary Clinton, has brought Manafort aboard as his chairman? He must go, wow, I've hit the Irish sweepstakes here. I've got one of the guys I deal with is now the top guy, well, he certainly looked like the top guy for a few months there, in the whole campaign for Trump. Is it just serendipity here? What do you think,
he also
Malcolm?
had General Flynn.
Okay.
And
Ken, go ahead.
General Flynn
Chris, you are-
received the...
Go ahead, Ken.
Chris, you're raising the fundamental question here, which is we know Paul Manafort's in pretty serious legal jeopardy, right? He's got all these financial entanglements. The noose is closing on him. The question is why? What's the relevance of that to the question of whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia? Is there a connection here? Why was Manafort brought into the campaign? Do his Russian entanglements in his business past bear on the question of Trump campaign collusion with Russia? That we don't know yet, but that's where this is all going.
Well, if you're Trump, you must wonder, did I start this or did the Russians start this? At some point, you go, wait a minute, I thought I just met, you know how the Russians do. You meet a pretty girl on the subway platform, and all of a sudden you're having a relationship. It turns out she's a spy, and you're a fool. I mean, you're shaking your head, Malcolm, because I think that's Russian tradecraft.
Well, I think what we have here is the fundamental question that everyone must answer before they do anything is this a Russian operation? Was this a large-scale, long-term operation in which they tapped their asset, Paul Manafort, to come out and try to manipulate this? And I think that's where this is going.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, according to the Wall Street Journal again, Mueller's team is looking into Michael Flynn's role with an effort to work with hackers to obtain Hillary Clinton's deleted emails. In fact, last July, President Trump openly called on Russia to find those emails. He was open with this. Let's watch him.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
Congressman, this is like in plain sight here. Here's the guy, the candidate for president, saying, go out and get what you can on my opponent. But you're not supposed to get help from overseas. You can have, Democrats abroad and the Republicans abroad, I suppose, but you can't have foreign powers helping you in a campaign. It's illegal. And there he was asking for an illegal act by the Russians. Your thoughts?
That's right. So when you combine this with the June 9 email, the Trump campaign certainly was willing and eager to receive information from the Russians. This Peter Smith individual, unfortunately, he's deceased. We won't learn any more about whether he was working with Michael Flynn.
But
he
committed
invoked
suicide.
Michael Flynn. And he invoked General Flynn. And again, if the Russians were placing bets, they didn't just place one bet on Paul Manafort. There were a number of people in Donald Trump's inner circle who had prior relationships with the Russians. So General Flynn, as you know, received money from Russia Today and sat next to Vladimir Putin, a huge insult to the United States. So there were a number of efforts that the Russians at least were making. And the question remains, did the Trump campaign take them up on it and work with them?
This is a Journal story. Tell us what you know.
Yes, so my colleague Shane Harris has been out front on this story, and he actually talked to this Republican operative, Peter Smith. And
he was 81 years old, and he committed suicide recently.
Just days after he spoke to Shane and told him about what he had done and basically acknowledged that, yes, he was out there soliciting from hackers these 33,000 emails that they thought were out there that they assumed were in Russian hands. That's unclear. But he would go tell people, I'm working with Mike Flynn. I can get these to the Trump campaign. That's what happened. He commits suicide after confirming that story. And now there's obvious questions. You can understand the attention being paid to Flynn because Mueller wants to know if Flynn was working with him.
Ken, you first then. Malcolm, what do we know about that? What do we know about Flynn? What do we know about this guy Smith who committed suicide, who may have been able to get something from the Russians, but certainly went looking to the Russians, I guess at the behest of the candidate who said he wanted somebody to do it. Get me what they got on Hillary.
This is one of the most incredible and bizarre stories in this whole Russia saga, right? And my hat's off to Shane Harris for breaking this story. I mean, Peter Smith was very serious about this. He had a whole operation, right? And so to the extent, if Mike Flynn is found to have participated in this in any way, it's going to be a serious problem for Mike Flynn and for the Trump campaign.
Why, legally?
I think so. I mean, you know, there's a legal theory that if you receive something of value from a foreign government, that's an illegal campaign contribution. Now, some information, there's a question about whether that's something of value, but clearly these emails would have been something of value.
The world I've worked in, they pay for that. It's called a commodity. That's what you pay for. It's called oppo. Malcolm, your thoughts about the evidence we have that this was something going on? Because when the president comes out publicly and sort of with braggadocio, it says, okay, Russians, come on, give me something you got on Hillary. Why don't you hack into her emails? I mean, I don't know if he was thinking about breaking the law, but he certainly didn't act like he thought he was breaking the law.
Well, you have to remember, Mike Flynn was the former director of Defense Intelligence. He had access to a lot of systems and plans and processes that brought large quantities of information right to his desk every day. You know, when I was working at NSA, we had a little sign in our division, and it said, "Gentlemen, don't read other gentlemen's emails, ... or email, ... except for us." I think Mike Flynn may have brought that dictum to the campaign, to where he had multiple teams of dirty tricksters whose job it was to get any dirt, any information. And when he saw these things being dangled in front of him, instead of viewing it from a counterintelligence purpose of not touching Russian assets, he may have gone for it. We don't know yet.
Well, speaking of getting the information and trying to get more, the CIA Director Mike Pompeo is a very close political ally of the president, even though he's head of the agency now. He's played down the Russian hacking story himself, saying it's something Moscow's done before. No big deal. Here he is.
Did Russia intervene in our election?
Of course. And the one before that, and the one before that. They've been at this a hell of a long time, and I don't think they have any intention of backing off.
Well, according to the Washington Post, Pompeo spends more time at the White House than his recent CIA predecessors and is seen as more willing to engage in policy battles, I guess, on their behalf. When asked about Russian election interference, Pompeo often becomes testy and then recites talking points. And, quote, earlier this year, he and other officials were enlisted to make calls, catch this, to news organizations speaking on condition of anonymity to dispute a New York Times article about contacts between Russians and individuals tied to the Trump campaign. And recently, Pompeo even defended the president's response to Charlottesville. Let's watch that.
I think the president was, frankly, pretty unambiguous about what his Justice Department is going to do, the way he views how utterly inappropriate it is for this hatred and bigotry. I think the president's remarks were very clear.
Eli, you have to wonder, since this President Trump has put the arm on a number of people, even Coates, he put the arm on others. Certainly he put the arm on James Comey before he fired him. Hey, help me out in this investigation. Quash this baby. You got to wonder what his conversations are like with Pompeo, who heads the counterintelligence effort in the CIA that would be usually responsible for getting more information to show this relationship between the Trump people and the Russians. And yet you have to wonder how vigorous he is in overseeing that.
Right. There's ample evidence that this president expects loyalty, that he asks for it. And we know from the Comey situation that it was Comey's refusal to say, I'm loyal to you, I'll just let the investigation go. That's what cost Jim Comey his job. And so Pompeo is still there. We don't know about their personal conversations, their private conversations. But you can read between the lines because you do see the way Pompeo is out there answering these questions.
Congressman, you worked with Mr. Pompeo in the same committee, and let's give it fair. Do you have full confidence that he will be a public servant here and bring all evidence he can, there is, in terms of any further development on the intel regarding the Trump campaign and its relationships, such as it was with the Russians? Will he be aggressive in doing that job, or will he be the president's guy? Which one?
Chris, I like Mike Pompeo. I think he's a bright guy. He served our country. And I have found so far that the committee has had great cooperation with the agency. So it does trouble me to read this. I think it's something we should learn more about. But frankly, Chris, in this situation with the Russia investigation, I'm mostly worried about the principal and not the deputies. I'm worried about the way the president has been acting and the way he's been bullying and obstructing people. We just learned this week that he was calling senators who had written legislation to make sure Mueller would stay in place, trying to get them to back off of that. He seems to be the lead here. And so if people are following his lead, that's because the principal is acting inappropriately.
Do you believe in calling Tom Tillis, and who's in cooperation now with Chris Coons, a Democrat, in trying to protect the special counsel, Bob Mueller, from getting fired by the president? The fact that he put his arm on him, trying to get him to not support that legislation, not to co-sponsor it. Do you think that's an aspect of obstruction?
He certainly made witnesses now out of these individuals, and it's not a way that an innocent person would act, Chris. Innocent people cooperate with investigators, and they want to get the investigation over with as soon as possible. He's actually working against himself because his obstruction has delayed the committee's investigations, and it continues, I think, to delay the FBI and the Department of Justice's investigations. That's not how an innocent person would conduct themselves.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Ken Delaney, and sir, as well, who's our colleague here, U.S. Congressman Eric Swalwell. Thank you, sir, for that, especially the last part. Malcolm Nance, as always, and Eli Stokel, my colleague right here on the Wall Street Journal, which has done such a bang-up job here.